Welcome to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. Coming up for discussion on our Viewpoints panel, a single mom crisis. Later on, we'll be talking about life skills development. Stay tuned. And these are the issues we'll be presenting today to our Viewpoints guests for commentary. Described as a crisis in Toronto and perhaps in other urban centres, single motherhood and the absence of dads. Some ethical questions raised about the new CBS reality series called Kid Nation, described as a child version of Survivor. And expect a $2.40 increase in your next cable bill. In fact, maybe not your next one. The reason to pay for a new channel for the blind. Later on, we'll be talking about life skills development. But first, let's meet our Viewpoints guests. Robert Metz is president of the Freedom Party of Ontario, and Dr. Anthony Hutchinson is executive director with the Brampton Neighbourhood Resource Centre. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks for having us.
Now, this was quite a write-up given here. Let's take a look at the headline, Where Are the Men? A very appropriate title. Now, Toronto is highlighted in this article, and I did mention in the introduction that perhaps other urban centres may be experiencing something very similar, but this is highlighted. We keep hearing in the news about the gang problem, the violence in Toronto. We also hear in news about the poverty situation in Toronto and other areas, urban centres especially. This article highlights the plight of moms in Toronto. On one hand, it talks about how difficult it is, talking about some moms holding 2-3 jobs to hold down the fort, but there's a difficult price to pay for that. Children, in these cases, sometimes too often, go astray. Dads are absent. The article points out in many cases, you've got kids raising kids. In my opinion, it's something that we need as a society to pay attention to and do something about. I know that it becomes a political issue. Many people say, well, raise the poverty, well, when it comes to dealing with poverty, raise the wage, the minimum wage, or perhaps raise welfare. But we've got a social problem on our hands that we really need to discuss. You're coming more from the political. You're coming more from the social. It's going to be interesting to hear your points of view. And I'm going to start with you on this one, Dr. Hutchinson, just to hear your overall analysis of this problem.
You know, I got to say, Christine, that we are in a crisis. And, you know, having worked in the Sparrowway community, which this article touches on with Pastor Bruce Smith, working with the families in Sparrowway, working in Malvern, working at a lot of other what we call maybe high need areas throughout the GTA. You know, I just flew in from Vancouver, and I can tell you that they have the same problems there.
Major urban center as well.
And I flew through Winnipeg. They have the same problems there. So yes, it's being, you know, it's prominent because of maybe some of the higher profile gun violence incidents that have happened in the GTA. But we are in a crisis, and when you are in these communities, whether you be in Malvern, in Jane Finch, in you know Jane Trethewey, in Sparrowway, in Rexdale, you see a pervasive problem, and that is fatherlessness. You know, where are the dads? The dads are absent in many cases. You may have a family that has 3 or 4 or 5 kids, and the father is actually in jail or himself has been murdered. And this is becoming a very, very serious problem in our society.
It's a crisis.
It is a crisis. And what's happening is we have an absence of role models, an absence of leadership, a vacuum of mentorship. And you do have children. And one of the most stigmatizing things is the single moms who are working 2 and 3 jobs to try and make ends meet. They still represent what we call the working poor. And as a result, we have an abundant number of latchkey kids who are out there, you know, looking out for each other and then trying to find a sense of identity. And finding that sense of identity, they form groups. Sometimes we erroneously call those groups gangs, but usually what are mostly noted as gangs really aren't gangs. They're just a group of young people who find a sense of identity together. They might want to call themselves the Bloods or the Crips, but they're really not the Bloods or the Crips. They couldn't even be able to survive a day with Bloods and Crips if they went down to the States.
Yes.
But they are groups of kids who are trying to find a sense of
belongingness.
Belongingness,
Very basic.
exactly, and identity, exactly.
Now, Robert, the political angle, as I see it, and you may add something completely differently to this, is we see it all the time in the news, and from political activists, poverty activists, which is good. They have their place in society. We need to do something about our poor. We need to help them. I believe that. I sincerely do. But the question is always how. Raising awareness is very productive. Groups like your own, the Brampton Neighbourhood Resource Centre, extremely productive in society. But there are those that say, raise welfare, raise minimum wage. I mean, there's a time and season for these things too. But I'm concerned about the mentality we have out there that, to me, needs addressing. We need to work within people's minds so that the cycle of poverty could be broken. You're doing that. But from a political perspective, do you have something to add to this or something to bring to the table here?
It's very interesting. I first read this article last night when it was forwarded to me, and I thought about it overnight, and I said, my goodness, if you're looking for an answer to solve this complex, deep ingrained problem
Everybody
right now,
is.
it's not going to happen overnight.
Of course.
I think, and from a political point of view, politicians aren't on the front lines. It's people like Tony who are on the front lines.
Certainly,
okay?
certainly. We need to be reminded of that.
So I just saw a smorgasbord of issues here.
Definitely.
When I looked at the big picture. First of all, I don't believe that poverty per se causes crime. It's not true, and it's not a racial issue at all.
And it's insulting to the poor. I know a lot of poor people. Growing up, still do.
That's true.
And the ones that I know are not criminals. So what are you saying?
During the Depression, crime rates were not as high as people thought. If you're aware of, there's an economist in the States named Thomas Sewell, who has spoken many times. He's a black economist. He grew up in Harlem, back at a time when he said it was safe enough to sleep out on the fire escape at night, and not be worried about having anybody rob you or steal anything away from your property. It wasn't part of the culture. Politically, I can see other issues. Minimum wage laws going up are not a good thing for kids because it's going to push them further away from the workforce because they need that first step up. We see certain child protection laws in which really protect unions from cheap labor, which we might get into in another issue later on. There's this moral relativism that's being just accepted by everyone as though there is no standard by which to judge people. We see a push, for example, some people want to get rid of laws against spanking, just proper parenting and spanking of that sort where there's some discipline for kids. There's also a predominant belief politically in using force and coercion to achieve social objectives. So why should we be surprised when kids use the same methods to get their objectives? So, and then there's family law, where you have, I can see why a lot of fathers might run away, terrified at the kind of things that courts are putting on people in terms of, I've seen some blatantly unjust support kind of payments and things like that, where perhaps the father cannot even afford to pay. He's still being forced to provide beyond his means because of whatever conditions might have happened prior to a split up or whatever. So you can see all these factors. Each one is a show in itself.
But you see, Andrea Reed, who is a 36-year-old single mother, is quoted in this particular article, and she just gives one example of how a type of a mentality could perpetuate some kind of a behavior. Here's what she says, quote, now I'm quoting directly here, Andrea Reed, she says, and she's referring to, well, the black population, the men, okay? Now, this article talks more about the black population, signifying that, according to census reports, that half of single parent run families are in the black community, 1/5 the other communities. But here's what she says, where black women are concerned, and I'm quoting here, I feel they, referring to black men, don't think that we are probably deserving of marriage. It's okay to be with us, to have kids with us, but not really to commit. You're seeing a kind of a mentality here, a treatment of women here that goes both ways. Why are the men treating the women this way? Number one, and why are the women putting up with that?
I think it's unfair to just say that it's so prevalent in the black community. Because actually, what happens is, if you look at the let's say the white community, well, maybe there's more education in terms of safer sex, so you might not have as many children being born because of the safe sex, whereas the education level in marginalized communities tends to be not as prevalent. And so there's wider factors, and you need to look at what the risk factors are that the kids are facing in these communities. You know, when it's not that poor people are going to be more able to, or predisposed to committing crime. It's not that racialized people are going to be more predisposed to committing crime, but there's what we call multiple jeopardies, or there's multiple risk factors that if you do come from a marginalized community, or you do come from a single parent family, or you do come from a poorer community, that your chances of being engaged negatively in society are going to be greater.
We need to educate these communities, though, no
right.
matter what that community is. We need to educate these communities.
Yeah, and a lot of racialized kids are pushed out of our school system. A lot of racialized kids. We talk about racial profiling with police. I see more racial profiling going on in our school system. Teachers pushing, and the Ontario Human Rights Commission has even identified that the two populations of kids who are treated the most disproportionately are racialized kids and kids with disabilities. And so when we have but it's, you know, it was a little bit of a flash, and then it was passed, just completely glossed over. So, you know, we're fast to point the finger at police when we need to look at things like our own school system and say, how are we treating kids who come from vulnerable populations and vulnerable communities?
Now we must go for a break, and I'm talking maybe a minute at most. We're already over, but I've got to ask you this from a political point of view, Robert. Do you believe that, politically speaking, now you're clear on the raising of the minimum wage, that you're not for that, but do you believe that more money, public funds, needs to be perhaps put into these community projects, particularly for the young? Now, I'm not talking just taking money and blindly putting it in. Perhaps we need to take a hard look of how our money is being, where it's being distributed in society first.
When you say public funds, you mean government funds.
I'm talking government funds, but
right.
the public's paying for it.
Generally, though,
it's tax money here.
Government funds cannot be controlled in the way that you are suggesting. That's just simply not possible. It has to be an independent agency of some sort that has control over its funding and its money and where it goes. That's why I always advocate preferably a private approach, a voluntary approach. Because public funds, again, that's the government going to another group in society and taking their money without their consent. How is that different from what we're accusing some of these kids of doing in that sense? Or what kind of lesson is being taught there? I think if you want to see children brought up with a certain standard, you know, like thou shalt not steal, a good place to start, you know. Let's have our governments operate on that same principle. It would be a novel new approach for most governments.
But we're only scratching the surface here, believe it or not.
There's no way we could get into this deeply.
Definitely not. We're going to go for a break here. Ethical questions raised on a new CBS reality series involving children. We'll talk about it after this. Stay tuned. Hello again and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. The second issue we're talking about, CBS puts kids in reality TV's tender care. Now that is referring to a new program in question called Kid Nation. It's a reality series that, so-called, according to the article, dumped 40 American children at a New Mexico ranch for 6 weeks. Now, producers are saying it's no different than a camp. However, here's what critics are saying. Well, you can say it's no better than a camp if, well, the reality is 22-page documents had to be signed, single-spaced, imagine that, so that's a lot of work you're looking at here. Legally exhaustive contract to take your child to an unspecified, remote, and, quote, inherently dangerous locations. Basically, washing the producer's hands of any danger that your child could be in, and according to what this article is saying here, kids could be in danger of not only picking up all kinds of germs, okay, and that sounds trivial, but even other kinds of dangers because they're just in some faraway location. Any accident, anything can happen, because what you're looking at is these bunch of kids in a situation like Survivor. Problem here, would you say?
Ridiculous. You know, I just got to say, the minute you put reality in front of the word show, you know, it's just, do we need another reality show? You know, we've become a Bachelor, Bachelorette, Survivor, you know, kind of a culture.
Competition is fierce with these reality shows.
And you got to ask, like, who's really, and I wonder who the advertisers are going to be on this show. Right, because it's a kids show, so what are they going to be like, having Toys R Us or whoever they're, you know?
Very interesting point.
You know, and so, you know, kids are staying up later.
Kids are on it. Are they aiming it at kids too?
Well, they are aiming it at kids, and kids are
kids and adults. This will have an appeal, I must say, from the economic point of view to everybody, because parents want to see, because if they have kids, they're curious, they could relate, and kids will also relate. And that we actually discussed this on our last show of On the Line, how far advertisers are willing to go to get the marketing, well, to market to kids, because right now Much Music is in a contract with MasterCard in order to get kids basically hooked on the plastic from a very young age. Simply because once upon a time it was believed that kids younger than 18 didn't really play an important marketing role, but now apparently they have some buying power that people didn't realize before.
Anybody who has a child knows,
well, through the parents, of course,
mommy buy this, daddy buy that. Exactly.
Yes. Of themselves, they have no buying power, but through the parents, they have it all.
Yeah.
You know, it's what we call reality shows too. It's not reality, please. You know, and it just shows the changing mores. You know, I do a lot of research into entertainment, and it's funny that just recently, you might not notice, there's an episode of Star Trek, the old Star Trek with Captain Kirk, if you recall, and there's an episode called Miri, which was actually banned in the United Kingdom. They refused to play it on BBC until 1991 or two because it depicted children abandoned by their parents who all died because of some nuclear something or other, right? And it was almost like a Lord of the Flies version of Star Trek, and yet that was considered so sensitive that you couldn't put something like that on the air. Now you're tossing kids out into, and I didn't see an age, but the only age I saw referred to here was 12 years old. Yes. So I'm assuming that's an average age, young. Okay, but not too much younger than that. But it's almost like child abandonment. Dumping them off and letting the cameras follow them.
Oh, don't forget the army of child psychologists that are going to be on hand, because that makes it all okay.
Yeah.
They probably invented the thing because of the way a lot of them think about child psychology. You know?
And it's not going to be like these kids are going to be abandoned. You're going to have, if anybody who's involved in television production knows that you have tons of people on a set.
Sure, and behind the scenes.
They're going to have first aid, and they're going to have. So it's first of all, it's
first aid after the fact.
Yeah, exactly. but it's going to be a misrepresentation. It's not really even reality. But it's what they're selling and the image that they're going to portray, and they're going to edit all of the adults out, and they're just going to show the kids, and they're going to show this illusion of reality, and then you're going to have kids probably who are going to watch it, and you know, and themselves are going to look up to these kids and go, oh, well, we can aspire to that, but really it's a complete fabrication. But you got to say, why are they doing this show? They're doing it because obviously it's filling a niche, it's filling a void in the marketing realm, because shows are only put on for marketing reasons.
Something was mentioned in this article that really got my red lights up, and I wondered what was meant by it in terms of supervision for the kids. Here's what it says. And wash their hands, referring to the producers, of any responsibility for the kids' life or safety, in brackets it says, including any failure to conduct thorough background checks or to keep kids free from HIV or other sexually transmitted diseases. Does that mean the kids are going to be left alone to do whatever they please? I mean, I I didn't quite get that statement.
The article
It was
is,
there was an
impression.
implication there.
Yeah, and it just sounds like they're abandoning them and letting cameras follow them around, and maybe just stopping them before they do something perhaps dangerous or harmful to themselves, hopefully. But, you know, this comparison is, what's the big deal, it asks here. Kids act on TV shows all the time, don't they?
But a 22-page document that you have to sign, single-spaced.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call this acting in the theatrical sense of the word. You know, an actor goes to training, they have lessons. This is not what this is about, I don't think.
I think this is child abuse, I'm sorry to say.
Well, I think it's child exploitation.
I think it's abusive, frankly.
Yeah, and you could argue that
psychologically,
yeah.
you don't know how these kids are going to be impacted either.
Yeah,
I mean, the article focuses on the physical dangers as well, but psychological, it's evident.
And then these kids are going to become celebrities.
Yes.
Right? And you know, and we look at all of the wonderful test cases, what's happened to most child actors, right? And then we go down the list. I won't bother, but we all know them, you know, and just look at different strokes for
And these
example.
kids, more of an example of that, because it's pretty much a one-time thing, unless maybe one or two of them might make it higher. I mean, this is horrendous.
Yeah, and again, so I think that this is something where we need to look at who's behind the show. You have to look at the producers, the advertisers, and we just need to not watch it.
In terms of accountability, when it comes to the advertisers, when it comes to the bottom line and what we're basically willing to sacrifice for the almighty dollar, do you think the ship has sailed? Do you think really? I mean, I still hear people saying, look, we need to fight this. We need to do something about it. But is the horse already out of the barn, so to speak?
In many ways, but I think a lot of times what makes things like this popular is the newness of it, and once it wears off, and it's old hat and nobody's watching it anymore. And you couldn't...
What spooks me is that we tend to inch ourselves over and over more and more to that slippery slope. So we allow one thing in, we inch over to another. We keep going, fueled, of course, by the internet where nothing is censored.
That may be, but I personally think a lack of control and censorship in that sense, certainly for adults, is a good thing. Children, I think, are subject to a parental guidance of some sort. And so the idea of censorship is a non-issue with me with children. I don't call it censorship either when I censor myself, that's making a choice, or when I tell my kids they can't watch that. It's not like I've run to the government to tell them that they can't watch that. That's a whole different situation. You can turn that TV off.
The adult censorship issue is a whole different
That's a whole different ball game. And you know, even on my TV, like I was saying, I babysit my grandson who's 4 or 5 years old, and I give him the control. But all the favorite channels are just set to the kid channels, like the ones for his age, even from 2 to 5 years old. You know, so he doesn't go by the regular channels.
What an adult soaks his or her mind in, what adults soak their minds in, affects kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have to understand, too, who's airing this? CBS. It's not Kids TV. It's not YTV. It's not CBC Kids. It's not those kids stations. It's going to be aired on the main, and it's going to be aired in prime time.
Right.
and the reason is because what the studies have shown is that at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, we're not putting our kids to bed anymore. They're actually awake, which opens up a whole other can of worms into, like, how are we in terms of parenting, in terms of, I remember I used to go to bed at 8 o'clock.
Huge issue. How are we in terms of parenting? That is the big question. We're going to go for a break now. When we come back, expect $2.40 more on your cable bill. A new channel for the blind. We'll talk about it after this. Stay tuned. Hello again and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. The third issue we're talking about, the CRTC has approved a channel for the blind. The headline, a mere $2.40 for telling it like it is. CRTC rules that cable TV must have channel for the blind. Written by Rob Mackenzie. It's a commentary in the National Post. $2.40, you may wonder, well, what's the big deal? You're helping out the blind. Rob Mackenzie brings up some interesting points here. He says, when you look at it from a marketing perspective, how many people are really benefiting? And when you look at it long term, how many people are really going to watch this channel? Because you still have blind people listening to regular channels because they can hear. This one is going to focus primarily on narratives. That's going to be the focus of it. So it remains to be seen if this is really going to benefit the blind over the long term. Another justification for it was, when you look at the number of people, well, getting older by stats in our population and the incidence of macular degeneration, people are suffering more in terms of blindness.
I have friends with that
and
problem.
exactly,
Yeah.
and as the population gets older, it sounds grim, but we're going to see more blindness. So that's a harsh reality. But as Rob Mackenzie points out, yes, it's only $2.40, but if you're looking at the working poor, and you're looking at certain elements of the middle class. I mean, you've got lower middle class, middle, upper middle, if you really want to start getting technical about it. But people are struggling to make ends meet. And you say, well, what's $2.40? Coffee for a week or maybe a day, depending on the kind of coffee you buy. If you go to McDonald's, well, that's a different story. But it adds up. That's not, nothing more. I'm saying nothing here. I like it. Now, anyway, nothing more to be said. But the bottom line is, the coffee, he's saying, adds up. People keep hearing, well, it's only a cup of coffee a day if you pay this. Well, it's only a cup of coffee a day if you pay that, but it adds up over time. So those are basically the elements of the article, and it comes down to, who do you support in this?
Who's going first?
You go first.
You know, when I first saw the subject matter, I said, what is this, a joke? Because blind people watching TV, it sounds like it should be something more to do with radio than with television.
Good point. Radio. That's a good point.
And I've even noticed in my own cable package that television of late has become more like radio than the TV I used to know. When I used to subscribe to cable, I wanted to get the movie channels and like entertainment with plots and outcomes and conflicts that resolved. But if you click around now, it's all information. You've got the Weather Channel, news channels galore, all kinds of them, ticker tapes going by.
But you're hitting a sensitive point with me there, specifically about the movies, because that's a downside I see. It hasn't become more like radio. If you look at these older movies, even the Alfred Hitchcock ones, the dialogue in those movies were so rich.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it's just all based mostly on visuals.
No.
But that's the movies, not the information.
Those actual movies are on some stations now. Like you've got the stations that cater to movies of that era.
And you also have the regular
Classic
stations that also feature the movies.
Well, when you go back, you think of the days of the Green Hornet or Dragnet, or they used to have these. They used to have the theater of the mind. And you have
no
all,
kidding. Good way of putting it. Theater of the mind.
Yeah, and you'd have all of these radio shows that were on the radio, and they
were great
yeah,
too.
Or
They were.
War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
One of the most famous things that created mass hysteria, was a radio program that was visually engaging, right, in the eye of people's minds. But I think that whenever we create a modality of technology, anything, whether it be medicine, whether it be television, radio, whatever it is, then the question of accessibility and who has access becomes the next question to be asked. And so we have television, and we have to say, okay, now we have television, now we have the movies or whatever, but we have to sit there and say, okay, now we have it. Where are the pathways of accessibility? And so when you're looking at any marginalized group and those with disabilities, so we might say that they're one group, we have to say, what is the pathway to the accessibility of that technology?
And I agree that's a legitimate question, but here's the issue. When you get the CRTC involved, you got both sides of the coin. Number one, they have to approve it, so you have to ask for permission. Maybe somebody was willing to do this years ago, but wasn't allowed to until they were given the permission to do it. And then once they give you the permission, it's no longer a voluntary thing. All of a sudden, everybody has to hop in the boat.
So here's the next question. Was it better, perhaps, on two fronts, to maybe tackle it as a radio issue,
or
have it as a specialty channel?
Well, even
I'm just putting that out as a
You know,
possibility
or
because it
even
will be
make
more
it-
expensive as a specialty. It wouldn't be 240.
I have a
simply because-
third option. Why
Yes.
not ask the cable subscribers voluntarily if they'd like to pay the extra fee to help fund that? I don't see it as being a single channel thing either. I can see this being more of a service, just like you have with what do they call that lettering on the bottom?
TTY.
Yeah,
Yes.
for deaf people.
You're talking about
you know,
closed
my
captioning.
TV can do that,
Yes.
right? It
Right,
can do
yeah.
that on a
Yes.
number of channels,
Yes, it
not
can.
just on a specialty channel. So I was thinking more that would be what they're talking about. But again,
Although
it's
for
a
the blind, what do you
specialty,
do? Yeah.
a specialty channel. So I'm thinking. This is a way of marginalizing them even further by well, here's your niche, you guys got to go over here, right?
But I
You're
think
not
it's
in the
even
same
wider.
room with the rest of us, so to speak.
I think it
Not
is
easy
why,
one.
because
No.
you raised a very, very important point, Christine, in that as an aging society, we're going to see more and more visual impairment occur.
That's what made it difficult to argue.
Yeah.
This one is really a tough one, I find. I agree with what you said, Robert, about radio is perhaps more appropriate. That's an excellent angle. But from what we were saying here too about macular degeneration, it's a reality.
It is a reality, and I think overall you need to look at a cost benefit. I think it's
You do
inappro-
have to do
yeah,
a cost benefit
yeah.
analysis, and I don't know if that was considered
No.
because then again, when you start talking cost benefit, you get labeled as, oh, how insensitive could you be? Because when it comes to issues of the disabled, I'm very much a proponent for the disabled. But as the article points out,
here
long
again-
term, we don't know even if this is going to help, because who says the
And I'm
blind are
not-
going to want to
and
watch
I'm not
this?
a big proponent of TV, period.
Well-
So my question
Well,
is,
that's another issue entirely. But again, here you have, the government.
unless it's your show.
Of course, of course.
The government through the CRTC forcing this one narrow option to everyone, okay? So I just think it should be choice. I think that people who are handicapped, when helped by government, should be targeted for their help so that they could pay for a specialty channel rather than make everybody else pay for it who will never use it or never
Although
turn
when
it
you're
on.
looking at issues involving the disabled as well, it's often, depending on what that disability is, to make the money to pay for it. That's another consideration as well. These people often find themselves marginalized in society because they can't get jobs as easily. And depending again on what that disability is, sometimes it's almost impossible to get a job. So they tend to be poorer, so to make them pay for it, you see, that's another issue as well.
And not only that the middle class, so to speak, and all the people we talked about are also sort of getting government assistance. That just absorbs more resources that could go to people like
Well,
that.
this
But
is a tough
again,
one. Yeah,
it's an issue. When they say it's a small price to ensure that all Canadians have access to TV, by forcing it, I call it a small immorality, because what you're saying is it's okay to take something from that person without their consent and give it to another person because you think that your cause is
But
good.
you see,
Everybody believes that.
when you look at the cost to even for universal Medicare, you could say that you're taking it without people's consent. I mean, this debate goes on and on.
And it's true, and
I
it
don't
has
have
a negative
problem, though.
effect.
I don't have a problem with everybody helping out the poor. I don't have a problem with that.
That's a different thing than the
And it's a
government.
different thing. I know, well, you're saying it's a different thing than the government, but our
demonstrable.
government, we live in a democracy where that's how our system of government has been, where we help out the poor. There
But
has been
but
universal.
unfortunately, the CRTC, as many of us know, it doesn't reflect a democracy. They do what they want when they want under their own conditions, and we know from the way a lot of things get approved that they have their biases.
And we're out of time
Yeah,
for
you
viewpoints.
bet.
I should stop now. Thank you both so much for joining
Thank you.
me. We're going to go for a break now. When we come back, we'll be talking about life skills development. Stay tuned.
Ground transportation provided by JP Motor Sales, located at 2320 Fairview Street in Burlington.
Hello again and welcome back to part 2 of On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. We're focusing now on life skills development. Vernon Banton is joining me. He is a life skills consultant and he's authored the book called What Often Wins. Vernon, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your book has a lot of material and it's very practical.
Thank you.
I mean, first and foremost, I have to congratulate you on the practicality of this book. It goes from not only if you want a job, what to do,
yes,
what a sample resume looks like.
Yes.
It even talks about if you're moving into an apartment, what the
yes,
rights of the tenants are. I mean, you've covered it, what to wear on an interview, very practical.
Yes.
But the focus today, I would like to be more on students.
Okay.
You've got a lot of kids that have graduated, they're going out into the workforce,
Yes.
and many of them don't have these life skills. I'm going to ask you right out, when you look at kids today, are they really prepared for the workforce?
I don't think so.
I'm talking overall. We don't want to stereotype
Right.
kids.
I don't think so. The reason why I say that is because people, when they think of life skills, they sometimes think that it's only practical in certain scenarios. But life skills is your entire life. So rather it's your career life, that's why there's a career section. Rather it's, moving out on your own. Rather it's understanding and demystifying consumer credit and finance, which is a very big issue for students,
Yes,
especially
it is.
going through student
Yes, it
loans or just being inundated with all these promotions in terms of getting credit cards or line of credits or student lines, different products, as well as maybe some people may be at the point where they can buy their first home. So there's a lot of things that needs to be demystified. So when you take a look at those subjects that I brought out, as well as motivation and inspiration,
Huge issues, huge.
They're really lacking. It's unfortunate.
Well, I think you summed it up really nicely there because actually the credit one is a big one for me. I've been seeing articles
Yes,
written about it that kids are really getting themselves into a lot of trouble when it comes to accumulating debt.
And it starts from the youth, and that's why sometimes moving into the adulthood, they still can't know to handle it because they didn't learn it from their formative years, especially during their post-secondary
What do you do to
education.
develop that? I mean, I keep saying it starts in the mind.
Well, what I would say, being formerly being a mortgage broker, I always tell people that, understanding credit is basically understanding the concept of money management. So when you're looking about getting a credit card, demystify that for yourself by taking the initiative, either reading a book like myself or talking to the bankers and asking them, how is it that I can actually obtain credit, maintain it, and better service me so that by the time that I'm at the point where I want to buy my first home, that I'm totally ready and I'll be credit approved. So they don't have to go through a larger application process because they would be pre-approved.
Now, what you're saying makes perfect sense, but some kids just aren't there. All they care about is, I want to buy this, I want to buy it now, I don't care about anything else, I don't know how to go about doing anything else.
That's correct. So what I would suggest to them is, first of all, when you're getting credit, credit shouldn't be, for example, a substitute for example, just an opportunity to binge. It really should be a substitute what you would normally pay cash for, but maybe at the immediate moment, it's not conducive. So it's not an invitation for a shopping spree, it's an invitation to start a budget. So if I was, for example, going to be speaking with students that are especially post-secondary and they just got the entitlement due to their age jurisdiction,
Yes,
they get an opportunity to get a credit card. I would say, you know what, take a budget, what do you actually need, because, which I also talk about budgeting in the book as well,
Yes, you
and
do.
I think that is really where
Crucial.
the big problem develops. If you don't have a budget, you don't have a sense of direction, then really a budget grounds you. And I always say that two set of people needs a budget, the less fortunate and the extreme rich. You can't maintain your riches if you don't have a budget to maximize your profit, similarly if you're a low income earner.
Now, Vernal, that's an excellent tip, having a budget.
Yes.
But I'm going to broaden that a bit when it
Sure.
comes to life skills.
Yes.
I'm of the opinion that
Okay.
if you have a plan in life,
Yes.
it's better. Very often, we all know it. Trust me, I know it too. You may make a plan in life, and life may not turn out how you planned it, but it's still very beneficial
Right.
because you may say, well, okay, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to study this because I'd like to be this one day. You may end up in a completely different career, but you still went to school, you still had the grounding, and nothing went to waste. What are your recommendations when it comes to goal formation?
Well, what I talk about, it's called Live and Give Your All, is the section about motivation. Combined with the budgeting section, I always say that you have to pretty much pursue your life goals relevant to where you are within the life cycles hypothesis. And that basically is a goal-setting module, and it's not supposed to be something that's stringent. It's supposed to be something that is set as a general parameters. Like, for example, stage 1, the early earning years. You know, it took me a long time to really grasp it, but the reason why the early earning years usually is so incumbent upon having so much debt is because it is the early earning years. Everything is a liability to you. Your student loan repayments, your first home purchase, everything is a liability. Moving on to the family commitment years, whether it's with children or just with your spouse. Moving on to that to the mature earning years, where by that point your debts are kind of supposed to be minimizing and really having that income threshold over the time. Saving and having looking towards your future, it becomes a little bit more easier. Going on to the nearing retirement years, which now your income is about to become fixed. Then going on to the retirement years where your income is fixed and have minimal income. So when we know where we are on the life cycles hypothesis, coupled with that with our investment goals, where we want to see ourselves in terms of our career directions or, you know, interview skills or, you know, buying your first home, it really makes sense. So your budget is not just, you know, if I should spend this on clothing today or if I should use it towards rent. It's just your whole overview.
So you need to form an overview for yourself.
Yes, where you see yourself, especially where you see yourself the next 5 years or the next 10 years, because that way you make a smoother transition into the next stage of life. And unfortunately, some of us that are really should be in our stage 3, in the mature earning years, we may be at stage 1 because we're starting over again.
Exactly.
We could have lost our spouse due to illness, death, passing away, God forbid, or even just, you know, God forbid you have divorce.
Or you mature late.
Sure,
you know,
you mature late.
We're going to have to go for a break, but there are those that are probably thinking, you know what? I don't have a clue what I want to do in life. And there are others that will say, well, look, this is my goal, but I'm too fearful to go out and achieve it. What do you do then?
Topic.
We'll be back after this. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Hello again and welcome back to our discussion. We're talking about life skills development. Vernal Banton is with us. He is a life skills consultant and he's authored the book called What Often Wins. Now, Vernal, before we continue, you use a strategy in your book. Talk about how you developed it.
Well, basically what I want to do is, I thought it was important for people to know about the success of failure. Because I think a lot of people think that they're enabled by winning, and they don't realize that oftentimes when you win from the get-go, you don't develop what's called an actual game plan and a strategy, because sometimes it's by fluke or coincidence. So you don't necessarily know that if you can mimic it again. So outside of mimicking it, I think it's better to kind of plan it. So what I always think about when I think about what often wins is the first thing is, somebody said the number one question is, what is our purpose here in life? But I believe that the number one answer is, or the number one question is, what is our passion? You cannot develop your goals, whether it's pursuant to your credit, your budget, your home buying, you're getting married, whatever it is, until you have passion in life, then none of those things really matter. And I find that a lot of times people really get down on themselves because of failure. I can tell you this much, the reason why I think that my book is effective is because I failed so often at many things, so I had to find out what often wins, because through trial and error is how you learn many times what often wins.
So in other words, you're saying loud and clear, do not be afraid of stepping out and don't be afraid of failure.
No, don't be afraid. But more specifically, when you have, like, say, a book like myself and that has a sense of direction in terms of, it's about minimizing, you know, and mitigating your risk. That is what it's all about. So this is why I don't believe that there's a superlative. I look at your success, Christine, and I'm thinking to myself, a lot of people would want to emulate what you have, and the bottom line is, what often win for you may not necessarily be what will often win for me or somebody else. So in terms of, there's definitely clues, but what you have to start off with, I believe, is number one is passion. And there's the section's called Live and Give Your All, and it's 21 P words that I've used to develop your goals. And number two would be purpose, because if you don't have any passion, how could you have purpose in your goals pursuant to any direction, whether it's spiritual, financial, or health?
Now, not putting you on the spot, but what if a person, like I know of a lot of kids like this, and I know of a lot of parents that will say, look, my kid doesn't have any motivation.
Yes.
My kid doesn't have any passion.
I
and I'll
agree.
give you an example of one situation I know of where a kid felt, look, I'm graduating from grade 12.
Yes.
I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to take some time off to maybe go work as whatever. But you see, what the mother did was say, no, register in school, register at university or college, do something.
Yes.
And while you're trying to decide, you're doing something, you're working towards something, you're at least improving your skill in a practical way. Well, it so happened that as that student went ahead, the student started to discover the passion. So I'm concerned about, like, what does a kid do, or a parent, if the kid just does not have passion?
Well, what I like to do first thing for myself is that I like to get like a paper, and it doesn't have to even be lined, and I fold it in the middle. And on one side I put pro, the next side I put con, and then I just brainstorm. So I like to pick the 7 major topics that we normally go through in life, whether it's, for example, what our interests are, like our hobbies, because many times our hobbies are an extension of what we can do as a livelihood. You know, for example, myself, I started this as a passion, and my passion was that I wanted to really help people, youth as well as adults. And what the biggest shock for me when I was going through the religious organizations like the churches, the community centers, the libraries, and youth associations is that a lot of adults were coming out, and that kind of shocked me. That it realized that, so when you don't get the direction at a younger age, it's going to spill into your adulthood. So what I've realized is that passion is really about things that make us happy. Because in business, if, for example, if you're going to start a business, the number one key is to have passion, because even when you're not making money, you're still motivated via the passion to continue. And once when you start getting money, it'll keep you motivated yet again. So passion is a thing that is a theme of life. So once when you find, for example, if you don't know, then say to yourself, well, pick categories. So when you talk about finances, well, I need my finances to improve, so I have to write pros and cons. Is my budget in check, or am I just spending frivolously? If, for example, if it's time for me to get married and settle down, for example, how long have I been with that? Does that person have that character traits that I'm looking for? If it's like spiritual, are we at that spot where we want to be with God, or are we kind of like wavering? So any topic, throw them out there and write the pros and cons of each, and then you start to say, yeah, and you'll find that one side is more full than the other. It's not usually
What I'm hearing
balanced.
from you overall, loud and clear, is you must plan. You cannot
You
get
have
away
to.
from planning.
Well, what happens is if you don't, subsequently, if you don't plan, then maybe you may fail. If you fail to plan, then plan to
plan to
fail.
fail.
Because what happens is, again, many people don't believe in luck. They believe that in divine intervention. But what happens is easy come, well, unfortunately, easy go. So when we don't have a sense of stern direction and strict unifocus that when I'm dealing with, say, finances, how to get it on track, then how are you going to get there? Because if you stumble into it, unfortunately, you most likely will stumble out of
But
it.
I'm going to pick you up even on the area of divine intervention.
Yes.
If you're a believer in that, which I am,
Yes.
faith without works is
I
dead.
believe.
You still got to work. You still have to have a plan. We'll elaborate after this. Stay
Yes.
tuned. Okay, thanks, Mindy. Hello again, and welcome back to our topic, life skills development. Vernal Banton is with me. He's authored the book called What Often Wins. Now, Vernal, where can viewers get a copy of this book?
Well, they can contact me at www.whatoftenwins.com, and my phone number's there, and all the email instructions are there.
Now, you've given an overview about planning, how important that
Yes.
is, because basically speaking, if you don't have a plan, well, then you're planning to fail, bottom line.
Bottom line.
But when you've made your plans, okay, let's jump ahead here. You've made your plans. You got to go out for that interview. You talk about how to prepare for interviews. Share a few practical skills here.
Well, in terms of the interview, one of the things that people, they get tricked by some of the questions, like, for example, did you know where the place was? Did you have any problems getting here? That's actually a trick question to, they want to hear that you prepared the day advance, or you, for example, took the bus there the day before, or you actually planned out the route or called, for example, the information line for the public transit. They want to see how much initiative that you'll take on the job if you have to do that with a client. So, or a lot of things that people also fail to understand is get ready to dress for success.
Oh, no kidding. Don't go for an interview in jeans, for instance.
Because a lot of people believe that because a field is, for example, very casual, they don't understand an interview is typically based on the corporate mindset. So
Yes.
even if it is, for example, a cleaning job, or let's say a job that is more, say, administrative, that it's very, like say at the amusement park or something, they don't think that they need to dress up, but your presentation has a lot to do with it, because it takes, as well as initiative, but it takes a sense of like your confidence, because it's not just also how you dress, it's how you talk, how your proper eye contact, your smile, you know, clean hands, fingernails, polished shoes, all those things. A lot of people just overlook it. They think
it's competitive.
It's very competitive. You know, and I always say that no matter how much skills that you have, there's always people with more. So it's someone with a complete package, from the way that they dress, they talk, even the people that as soon as you come into the building, you're greeting the assistants. They don't necessarily think that they have very integral points. The interviewer will go back and ask them, were they, you know, on time? How was their conduct? Were they kind of walking around the building? A lot of people don't even think of stuff like that. Relevant to the resumes, however, obviously they would have gotten the interview based on a decent resume at that point, but the resume, most people devalue their skills. I have to say this. They'll say stuff like, for example, I can answer the phone, and they leave the statement like that, whereas many of them, they want to say that they're able to operate, you know, a switchboard, incoming and outgoing calls, and redirect and advise clients of which is a better department to go to.
In other words, you are the #1 marketer of your own skills.
Well, a lot of people are afraid of what they say, you know, self-praise is no recommendation. And so a lot of people become fearful because they look at themselves as, then that sounds like I'm kind of conceited, but what they don't realize is the skills have the mindset of being transferable skills, and skills that are basically success stories.
Yes, well, Vernal, unfortunately, we're out of time for today. Remember, again, www.whatoftenwins.com. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Vernal. See you again next time. I'm Christine Williams, and from all of us, thank you for watching.